Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here talking to you today. As mentioned, I run a policy advocacy initiative where we work closely with government to try to ensure that policy supports our ambition to net zero. And I'm delighted to be here with Brian today. Do you want to introduce yourself, Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So I'm a CEO of a company called Beam. We get to do something really cool, which is throw robots in the sea and then try and fish them back out again. But ultimately, we're one of the tech for good companies, applying robotics, autonomy, computer vision in the renewable energy space, which is really good fun, really rewarding. Just a really quick overview of the company. This year, we'll have made about 70 million of sales, which sits in 2024 and a little bit in 25, and some in 26 in total. The company has 220 staff, including the contractors, in terms of size and scale. And we're one of the old or traditional sort of seed, Series A, Series B type businesses that have sort of come up from sort of startup land back in 2016. But
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you tell me a bit more about how your company is supporting our ambition to get to net zero?
So, yeah, it's when you look at net zero targets, I remember looking at a graph that Bloomberg produced quite some time ago, back in 2022, I think it was. And what this graph showed was world energy needs between now and 2050. And the line just goes up. Like the world needs more power. There's more people get smartphones, more people get in cars, and all of this. So the world's energy demand is only increasing. And then there were two dotted lines. And one line was a net zero transition, and that was essentially, that showed almost electrification of everything, from transport to heating to, well, almost everything. And the other line was an economic transition, which didn't really have oil and gas reducing very much at all, a little bit, but in the economic transition, we didn't manage to electrify our transport networks, we didn't manage to electrify heating circuits. And ultimately, in an economic-based transition, people will just use the source of power which is the cheapest. And ultimately, that doesn't help climate change, and we're only going to see more and more of those sorts of issues. So having looked at this, actually it was 2019, the first year. Having looked at it anyway, we kind of decided that I needed to divert or move the company into trying to deal with that shift and try to help renewable energy start to lower its costs in its supply chain. So particularly in offshore wind, I mean, onshore wind's the same. In fact, almost all industries are the same. Supply costs are only really going up the entire time. With inflation, wages are going up, transport costs are going up. And none of that helps an economic transition move closer down to being net zero. So ultimately, the solution sits in supply chain and lots of other areas, and policy and regulation and stuff that you guys do. But ultimately, if we want renewables to actually beat oil and gas, or if we want the world to rid itself of its addiction to burning fossil fuels, renewable energy has to compete on a like-for-like basis, so that if there isn't the right regulations and support frameworks and government incentives and all of this, which there aren't going to be in every single country around the world, that the renewable energy industry can actually compete fairly and actually can win. So dedicate ourselves to focusing on renewable energy only for that purpose, really, to try and help it actually beat, on an economic basis, oil.
Excellent. And how does AI play a role in what you're doing?
Oh, it's super cool. It's so tech, and I'm sure there's lots of people in here that are coming from tech business or doing AI in a tech business. It's really fun to work with and see new technologies coming through. But B, it's really good to see actual impact with your tech and how that can actually deliver good outcomes. So how do we use AI? It's lots of areas of the business. So there's the easy ones, which you can see on the website and sort of in our press release and stuff. So we're currently using an AI system in, I guess, the autonomous control of an underwater robot. In the system looks at its environment, starts to recognize certain things in the environment, and then using a behavior tree, we then sort of I guess, control the behaviors of the robotic vehicle to actually do work. So we have an AI system controlling an autonomy system that's then enabling the vehicle to actually do work. We've got AI processes within some of our data analysis parts of what we do. So I think my head of AI is actually, or VP AI is just over here in the crowd. We should get her up. But she's doing AI in varying data sets, from multi-beam echo sounded data sets to, sonar data sets and sub-bottom imaging data sets, and using AI in varying sort of data processing pipelines. But some of the coolest stuff about where AI can fit in a business can actually fit in any business. And it's like the simple things. I'm sure anyone here who's a developer or an engineer is already doing it, like using Copilot alongside your day-to-day work. But then there's some even more interesting things that you can do. So actually, I'll just do the normal ones first. My marketing team's using ChatGPT to write press releases. My people team are using AI to help them write job specs or job descriptions or job adverts. I believe the team are starting to look at how we might be able to use a RAG sort of based AI system, or retrieval augmented generation, to actually load up all of the hundreds of tenders we've written previously, using sort of traditional sort of retrieval based AI systems, combining those with language models to sort of generate new content, I guess, based on our previous content, and then have a RAG based system that helps write our tenders. So we're doing lots of really interesting things that other businesses could copy and emulate. And what that does in its entirety is help force multiply the efforts of people, so that you can get, so you can assist them with doing their work, and essentially, I guess, speed them up, and essentially force multiply people. So if you've got, I mean, it used to take me an hour to write a job description for an exec team member if we were looking at hiring someone. Now I can do it in 5 minutes. And so that means I can use the other 55 for something else. And it's exactly the same in every area of the business, whether you're in personnel, tender writing, you're the guys controlling robotic vehicles, and soon they'll be able to control 4 or 5. Or an inspection engineer, looking to basically help build I guess, models that help spot anomalies on objects. So we're using AI in lots of areas of the business. But the really cool stuff is getting robots to fly by themselves. And come back again.
Excellent. Well, while we're on the topic of AI, something that we talk about a lot when we're talking about the clean energy transition is a just transition. And I think we sort of talk about similar things in the AI industry around efficacy. And I'm just sort of interested in how you feel about those things in your business.
So I'll probably skip around the ethics side of AI and sentient AI, and place it more on sort of the jobs side. There are some industries where AI can actually massively disrupt them, and some of those industries might be worried about whether or not their roles are at risk. I know that there's been recent, I guess not angst is probably the right term, in some of the creative industries with sort of recent AI tools that have come out. But in some industries, they are so short on people that actually it's not an issue at all, and AI is only actually going to help solve that particular issue. So in offshore wind itself, it seems that's my industry, it's one that I know best. There's currently 30,000 technicians working in offshore wind, and the industry needs 100,000 by 2030. And that's a shortfall of 70,000 people. So actually, AI is not stealing any jobs. It's actually going to be there to help actually deliver the targets that we're setting for ourselves. Because with a shortage of 70% of the workforce, there is no way the country can hit its targets of, the previous target of 50 gigawatts by 2030 is now 60 gigawatts under Labour by 2030. So because of that huge shortfall of people, AI and tech has to be used to actually make up for it. We need to find ways of getting 2 or 3 or 4 days worth of work out of 1 day of technician's time. And whether that's someone that's spotting anomalies, or whether it's someone that's, I guess, doing surveys on infrastructure, it's like AI is there to help enable and empower those people to do more, or to empower the vehicles or the robotics that they control and monitor or supervise to do more. So we used to have, or we still do at the minute, but shortly it will change. The business is like 2xing every year at the minute-ish. And we use 3 ROV pilots to control an ROV, and an ROV being a remotely operated underwater vehicle. Using an AI-based control system, you no longer need 3 people to control one vehicle. You could actually just have one person controlling many vehicles. And in a business that's, and an industry that's sort of multiplying at such a huge rate, like, which is offshore energy, or renewable energy generally is massively growing, you need that to happen. Like, you need those people controlling more systems and more processes and more robotic vehicles. But yeah. And that's, I guess, if everything continues to grow, and I guess the energy industry or clean tech industry as a whole has support of government and regulations. So I'm just wondering, like, what is it you guys do that help with that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're an advocacy group, but I work with a group of investors that are really interested in clean tech and sort of use their expertise along with their portfolio companies to try to engage with government on multiple levels, so whether it be directly through the research that we do, to really try to influence them and explain to them where companies like yours are struggling, whether it be around the regulation or if it's financing or whether there is barriers to policy that's stopping companies grow.
So what would you say are the main, I guess, barriers to policy, or the main sort of regulations that you're working on, like right now, that kind of help AI or clean tech or any of this grow?
Yeah, I think the way that we use public funding to support some of these innovative technologies and companies like yours, we're really interested in how we can make public funding go further. So at the moment, quite a lot of our system is fairly grants-based, so we're quite interested in how we can use that funding more innovatively, whether it be through guarantees, loans, or blended finance, so that we can make our money go a bit further and support more companies more quickly. And then when it comes to regulation, as you can imagine, that we look at right across the clean tech sectors, so we deal with many different companies and many different regulations, and what we've found consistently is that the regulators are sort of struggling to keep up with the pace of change required to get us to 2030 targets and 2050 targets. So we've been advocating for better resource, use of AI where possible. Yeah, so that's the sort of thing that we do. And I'm sort of interested in your policy experience and how it's been for you.
So I guess BEAM's been supported relatively well by UK government, but mostly through, as you just said, the grants-based approach. I think we've had approximately 2 million, maybe slightly more than that, sort of projects that we've managed that helped us sort of build a SLAM technology, or something we call sub-SLAM, so SLAM being simultaneous location and mapping. And what that tech itself does is it forms the basis of an AI system that is driving a vehicle, because the vehicle can't drive around a scene unless it can perceive the scene. So our SLAM system is used to perceive the scene, and then we can navigate in it. So we're able to build a sort of persistent 3D world in memory and then navigate around that. And that was, initially, that tech was mostly built with government grant funding via Innovate UK. But as a loss-making startup, it was incredibly difficult to get any kind of loans, or particularly like funded backed loans, until COVID happened. And then essentially we were locked out of the debt market almost entirely, so we could only raise equity. Although we did do a very small debt round via Future Fund during the COVID times. But more of that, if there were more sort of, I guess, government guaranteed loan schemes, it would be a lot easier for some small companies to actually raise via debt rather than equity the entire time, which is really expensive.
Yep. And while we're on that subject, actually, I'm really interested in the history of how you started and the sort of journey that you've experienced, because I think your sort of decision to keep mainly working with the sort of wind industry and not the oil and gas industry, despite the fact we've still got quite a big oil and gas industry, is really interesting. So I'd like to hear a bit more about your history and what made you choose sort of to go down that route?
So, has anyone here ever worked on a ship for a long period of time? Okay. I'm assuming most people here have been on a ship at some point. Right, one of the nicest things to do when you're at sea is just basically to stare at sea. And if you've worked on a ship for a long period of time, round about, your first week's normally fine, round about week 2, week 3, you're starting to get a little bit stir-crazy, and week 4, you're dying to go home. You find yourself staring out to sea because you can't phone home or talk to your loved ones. And I was working in Equatorial Guinea for a company called Subsea 7, and yeah, there's a lot of oil in and around Equatorial Guinea and Nigeria. And I remember at night I was just sort of there staring out to sea, and I just looked around, and there must have been at least 20 or 30 flare stacks. A flare stack is when an oil and gas platform just basically burns its gas because it's got nothing else to do with it. It can't pipe it to shore. It doesn't have the infrastructure, and the gas needs to be gotten rid of from a safety point of view. Otherwise, it just builds up and can actually be quite high risk in itself. And you just see these 20, 30, 40 flare stacks, knowing that each one of those could power a small village or town. And it's just a huge amount of CO2 getting released. So that was back in 2010, and I was already sort of planning starting up this business. And I just decided I really didn't want to be in the oil and gas industry. It felt like I was I was going to say selling my soul to the devil, but I'm not religious. It just felt like I was selling out, I guess, doing exactly the wrong thing, which is earning money, helping oil and gas get better. So my next job, I actually had the opportunity to help build Sheringham Shoal Wind Farm, and then decided from then on, I was going to basically apply my skills and my background and everything I knew about robotics and offshore engineering into the offshore wind industry. And so that brings sort of, I guess, occasional problems these days, because the oil and gas industry is actually transitioning some of it across to wind. So Danish offshore natural gas, like Dong Energy, has become Ørsted. Gotten rid of most of their gas assets, and now they're the world's largest wind farm operator. One of our backers, a company called Equinor, is currently putting 24 billion, I think, into floating offshore wind. And so you'll see Equinor coming out as a powerhouse in floating wind. And lots of the, I guess, energy industries, or lots of the oil and gas companies, except probably ExxonMobil, all the other ones, do something in renewables. So that brings an interesting challenge. For instance, when you're speaking to Total or BP or Shell, and they're saying, yeah, great, you can come and work on our wind farm projects, but only if you help us in oil and gas at the same time. And we always say no. And at some point, it might bite us. It hasn't yet. And so there's always a temptation to go back. But equally, you end up not doing your purpose, and so you don't. And at the same time, you work with so many amazing engineers who are purpose-driven and purpose-led, like me, who could go and work for, I don't know, AI for law or something, but instead they choose to work on AI in offshore renewable energy. And we'd be letting them down at the same time. I'm sure they wouldn't want to work for an oil and gas company anyway. So by being purpose-driven, purpose-led, it makes it incredibly easier to attract and retain and pull in strong AI, data, and high technology teams. So if there's any business leaders here that are, I guess, have that sort of quandary, genuinely, when you have a purpose-driven company that's actually focused on something good, like greener planet, climate change, greener energy, it's far easier to recruit. And not only that, you feel far happier working in that business yourself. And everyone around you feels far happier working in that business. And so you end up with a group of people that can focus really hard on your problem, which is one of the beauties of Cleantech. That actually, I'd suggest most Cleantech companies probably have a slightly easier time of it in quite difficult recruitment markets. I mean, you must have seen lots of Cleantech businesses out there. Would you say that, do they all have that sort of thing going on, or are they also struggling with recruitment?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think everyone I come across that works in this industry is very mission-driven, purpose-led, but there is no doubt that we are going to have to go through a big transition on skills. And AI is going to help us, and that's great, but I think, we are still seeing shortages, and we are going to have to radically upskill people. And indeed, help them to transition their skills in order to support the transition, I think. And seeing as we're talking about team, I'm quite interested in your leadership experience of going from a small loss-making company to a multi-million-pound revenued company.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've got half my team here, actually. Please don't take notes. You have to evolve as a leader, and I guess my personality type, if you go back about 10, 15 years, in the offshore energy industry, I'd be called a North Sea tiger, I think is what they describe my management style as. Which you have to change. It doesn't work in startup land or starting up a business. So I kind of evolved very slightly from North Sea tiger into benevolent dictator. That also has to change. But that works in a really early stage businesses. And different stage businesses require different leadership skills and different management skills. And in the early days of a startup, it's really hard to surround yourself with incredibly high-skilled people, and you just basically have to take those that are choosing to follow you. And ultimately, that means that when you manage them, you have to draw a slightly tighter box around what it is you're asking them to do. So that requires a little bit closer management. But that environment doesn't work when you get to 20 people. It's like you can't be telling everyone what to do all the time, even if it is quite a successful route. So a friend of mine is actually writing a book of this at the minute, and there's about 4 distinct type transitions that leaders have to go through in terms of what behaviours drive the most successful outcomes. And actually, apparently, being a bit like benevolent dictator is probably the right thing to be when you're sort of 10 people or so. But it has to change, and it changes when you're at 25. You have to start installing a management team. The management team, if you want to have good managers, you have to trust them, and that then means that you kind of evolve your processes very, very slightly and become sort of more OKR related, more objectives and key results, and actually relying on your team telling you what it is they need to do. And then you basically go through that, and it evolves into greater series of management and objective setting and key results, and eventually your management team and your leadership team as a whole is so big that actually it's almost impossible to run it all that way, and you have to then evolve again. So I guess the final stage is kind of moving from sort of standard manager into leadership, and leadership is more about I guess influence and hiring the right people and getting out of their way and clearing the blockers for them. So the startup journey for a leader actually changes, and you have to go through these separate periods. And I know that if I was like where I am at the minute, I guess trying to give people sort of fairly large boxes to operate in and trying to do a startup, it'd be a lot harder to get successful outcomes, right, looking back on it. And you only realise this when you're getting towards the end of the journey, although I don't even know if I'm anywhere near the end of the journey. You just have to enjoy it as you go. And but ultimately, this transition I'm going through now, like Series C type level business, is now moving sort of solidly into leadership, whereby essentially I have to help mentor and coach and sort of get the best out of people. Even the ones that you might consider sort of lower performers or something, you still have to try to work really hard to get the best out of them, because actually it's often better the person you know than it is trying to change people out. So a coaching and bringing people forward type approach works far better at this end, and sort of moving sort of generally into sort of leadership and influence. So it's quite distinct sort of types of phases. And I know, I won't plug her book, but she's writing it at the minute. It'll be out soon. And she's been brought in by a rather large VC fund to help basically pull this together so that VCs can learn to recognize the types of characteristics that you see in leaders, or what you should look for at different stages of business. But yeah, it evolves.
Great, thank you. I think we're coming towards the end of our time, so I've got one question left for you, a linked question left for you. Obviously, we've got a new government come in who have set some very ambitious targets for decarbonisation of our electricity grid by 2030. Do you think we'll make it? And also, do you think, what do you see as the future of your business?
So, if you look at the goals that we've set ourselves by 2030, 60 gigawatts, it is actually quite ambitious, and the UK can get to net zero by 2035 as a whole. We've got grid problems, but I think National Grid are investing, I think it's 18 billion into grid infrastructure, but we've got this really ancient grid system. We've got houses that aren't particularly intelligent, our own homes aren't self-generating electricity. We're not really using solar particularly much. We're not using solar that then drive heat source, whatever it is, heat pumps, air source heat pumps. So as a country, we've got to try to set up the regulations and the incentives to actually move the population to using those types of things. So in the near term, are we going to hit it? I think we actually will, because the noises that I'm hearing around sort of like grid improvements, the things that I'm seeing, like the tech improvements that you see with sort of, I guess, intelligent home networks whereby they're generating their own energy, like storing it in the car and selling it back to grid if there's overflow. These types of things are coming through like a freight train, and it's actually changing how we consume and use power in the UK to quite a substantial degree. Long-term wise, if anyone here has watched The Terminator, like we're trying to build Skynet for good and essentially have this intelligent system that's there running robotic vehicles, and those robotic vehicles are focused on the clean energy sector. But I'd say that's about 15 years out. So in the short term, are we going to hit them? Yes. There's lots of gaps, and there's a huge workforce shortage in all areas of, I guess, energy generation, or certainly like net zero within the UK. And the one thing I would sort of counsel, I guess, any tech leaders to actually look at is there's a lot of opportunity in that space. It's a massively growing industry, and it's one of the few that has a huge tailwind behind it. So, I mean, I look at a serviceable available market that's basically 10xing over that period. So that means just by being a normal business, my company will 10x. By being a little bit special, we'll get outsized growth. And that's true for most of the businesses in the clean tech sector in the UK that are basically associated with energy generation, whether that's what we're doing, AI for robotics, or whether it's sort of AI and autonomy systems for grid, or whether it's tech for your home. There's a lot of really cool, interesting challenges that can be worked on that require AI right now. And it's a massive, I guess, opportunity in the industry.
Great, thanks so much. And I think we'll finish there. Thanks, everyone.